Hello and welcome to the 4th episode of Fly With Your Shadow. I'm Jeff Robson, coming to you from my home in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This show deals with music, mental illness, and the mess that COVID-19 has made of all of it. Today's show contains honest and open discussions about mental illness. If these topics might be difficult for you to hear about, I urge you to get help right away. If you or someone you love is struggling, the right help can and will change a life. There's a section on the show's website at flywithyourshadow.com where you can find some organizations and resources that can and will help you. If you have questions or don't know where to turn, please reach out to me at flywithyourshadow@gmail.com. If you are or someone you know is in immediate danger or in crisis, please call 911 right away or find your local crisis support team. Don't wait. If there is a crisis, you need to act immediately. Always take a suicide threat or fear very seriously. Before I go any further today, I think it's important to address a topic that I've been asked about a couple of times, and that's the difference between mental health and mental illness. Those two terms are often used interchangeably, but they're very separate things. I think everyone understands that we need to exercise and eat healthy foods to look after our bodies and our physical health. If you don't do those things, you run the risk of increasing your likelihood of contracting a serious physical illness like cancer or diabetes. We all know this. In the same way, though, there are some things that we should do to look after our mental health as well. Avoiding stress, finding positive outlets and activities in your life, having healthy relationships, and much more all contributes to a healthy mind. I think we're becoming a lot more aware of the importance of those things in our demanding, hectic, stressful world. Mental health has become a new buzzword that you hear a lot, and it's a good thing. We all need to pay attention to that more. Unfortunately, if you don't look after your mental health, or if you have a genetic predisposition, you run a greater risk of developing a mental illness like depression or anxiety disorder or bipolar disorder, just to name a few. Trauma in a life can also lead to developing a mental illness, which we'll hear more about in this episode. Mental illnesses are still very misunderstood and rarely discussed, which leads to a lot of the fear and stigma that surrounds an illness. Those issues make it a lot harder to discuss and makes it more unlikely that people suffering will get the help that they need. Understanding that fundamental difference, I think, will help with today's conversation. I had a great time catching up with a musical friend that I've known well for almost 20 years.
Hi there, I'm Nicky Mehta, and I'm a singer-songwriter and 1/3 of a folk roots band called the Wailin Jennies.
The Wailin Jennies began here in Winnipeg in 2002 as a couple of low-key shows by 3 talented female singer-songwriters who shared a musical kinship. They were all building solo careers at the time and decided to kind of combine their talents and do shows together. Little did they know that the chemistry would be undeniable, and they'd quickly catch on and find the kind of runaway success that they could have only dreamed of as solo artists. Since then, the solo careers have taken a seat on the sideline, and Nicky Mehta and Ruth Moody have maintained a strong partnership. The third spot in the group has changed a couple of times, though, first with founding member Cara Luft, then Annabelle Chvostik, and now Heather Massey. The group has toured extensively in North America and enjoys a loyal, appreciative audience, especially in the United States, where they do most of their touring these days. They celebrated their 15th anniversary in 2017 with their latest album, 15, which was comprised of some of their favorite songs by other writers. The Wailin Jennies' last album of new material was called Bright Morning Stars, and it was released in 2011.
Oh, night, bring all your shadows and your silence. Silence make a hostage of my mind. Mind, bring on your trickery. Black dogs nip on at my heels till I look both in the eye.
It's been a while since Nicky put out a solo record, but she has a wonderful one called Weather Vane from 2001.
You wanna take them in your arms and carry to a river. Find the boy
I spoke to Nicky on the phone in February 2021. Even though she was calling from 15 minutes away from my house, our lousy connection makes it sound like she was calling from a fallout shelter at the South Pole. I sincerely apologize for that. Some parts can be a little bit hard to hear, but I think you'll be able to follow the conversation just fine. I like to start at the beginning of 2020. We all had plans and expectations for the year, and they, for the most part, didn't work out. What was your plan? What was on the horizon for you? I know you guys had some touring and stuff on the books. What did the year look like going in?
It looked fantastic. In fact, I mean, we booked so far ahead that we had 2 years that were going to be very full because we had just come off hiatus. So we were super excited to be back out on the road. And I think we actually, the last tour we had was beginning of March in North Carolina, which was actually one of the first places in the States to post new cases, which actually right in the place we performed. It was in Boone County, which is the last show we played. So we got a little freaked out. And in fact, all of us, we did a cruise, like a work cruise.
Yeah, you were on KMO, weren't you?
Yeah, for the first time. It was amazing. And thankfully we had that experience. I'd never been on a cruise before. And it was lots of fun because it was a music cruise. So it was nice to get that, to have that experience, because we were able to take my kids and Grant came along and did sound for us. And but at that point, like, they were, there was talk of it, and they weren't allowing people who had visited mainland China to board the ship. So it was already, being talked about. And I think we were on the boat at the beginning of February, and then we spent a couple of days in Miami, and then we came home. And I was gearing up for North Carolina. And that's when it really started. The talk was really starting. And by the time I went to North Carolina, we were thinking, okay, this is looking a little weird. But I was convinced, because everybody was saying this, and everything I was reading about it was like, oh, well, it's no worse than the flu. And, with SARS and MERS having happened, I was, thinking, okay. But Ruth, my co-founder, and a couple of the other, our like merch person, they were freaked out. Like, they were really worried. And we were playing in Raleigh, which is our second biggest market in the States. And we usually have a really long signing line afterwards. So we were sort of debating whether to do that. And then we did do it. And that was that. And who knows whether because everybody got sick, I think. So nobody knows whether they actually had it. But yeah, and then it all stopped.
So what was that transition like? Like, were you actually on the road and had to come back, or was it a matter of you were kind of between dates, or how did that work?
We were between dates, so we came back from North Carolina, and then that's when it all got real there, and then it became clear. We started getting tour cancellations, but I mean, we were going to cancel anyway. But we were waiting for the venues to cancel, and they did. And then basically everything got shifted to 2021, but it's going to, and I'm sure. So yeah, so we just, we were just thinking, I think initially everyone was sort of thinking, okay, well, this will be over in a few months. And so when things were getting booked a couple got moved to the fall of like 2020. And I remember saying to our agent, like, I really don't think those are going to happen. Like, I'm not, this is going to be over anytime soon. So yeah, things just keep getting shifted, which is in a sense is good, because this tour is still there. Because I think when things resume, a lot of the artists who haven't booked tours it's going to be hard. I mean,
for sure. Yeah. Like, how are you going to get a festival date in the next couple of years if you didn't already have one booked, last year? Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, I feel super lucky because we're so far into our careers that we don't typically have to struggle for those anymore. Doesn't mean we get to play everything, of course, but it's in a much more secure position, then I feel so much for the younger musicians that are, coming up. I just don't even know how they're doing it. It's just, I actually did a jury the other day for Manitoba Film and Music and adjudicating sort of up and comers, and I kept thinking, well, you guys have a tough road ahead of you. I mean, tough no matter what, but starting out at this point, yeeks. Yeah.
So for those of us in Canada, you don't spend a whole lot of time in Canada. So I think a lot of people in Winnipeg and stuff aren't really aware of how much you're still working. So is the Wailin Jenny still a full-time job for you?
Yes. Yeah, it is. We're, ever since we all had kids, we're not on the road as much as we used to be. We used to do 3 or 4 weeks at a time, and then I'll be off for a couple of weeks and then be back out there. So we were doing a lot of dates. And then, so we pulled back we're usually gone for about a week, a month, which is still a decent amount of touring. But we're almost 20 years old. So we've built this, we built the band up to the point where we can get the kind of fees we need in order for everybody to survive, so, and it became really clear pretty early on. We got really lucky by being invited onto Prairie Home Companion, which was, that whole thing just catapulted us, and created this following all over the States. And I mean, it's hard to break into the States as a Canadian artist. And yeah, so that really did it first. And then it became really clear that it sounds so mercenary, but you have to think, when you get to the point where you're not 20 anymore and, you're having kids and stuff, like you can't be, screwing around. You got to make a living, And so it became really clear that the only way to do that for us and not be on the road all the time was to be in the States, because the fees are much higher. You can go to one state and tour around that state, and with 2-hour drives between, which when we're traveling with kids at times, like babies, it's just it's just way more possible, way more yeah. So I mean, like when we put out an album, we'll do a cross Canada tour, and we would love to be touring in Canada more, but it is just like, I don't know how people do it and stay afloat,
So how hard was it for you to suddenly have that income and that part of your life just kind of come to a screeching halt?
Well, it was incredibly difficult on a number of levels. One of which was that, like, we had, we worked really hard over the years to kind of get ourselves into a good position, and, get ourselves into a position finally where it was like, okay, we can save some money. It's not just a matter of like, being able to pay our bills. We can actually, because musicians they don't have a pension, obviously. So it's like, okay, how are we going to, I'm not going to be touring when I'm 85. How are we going to, presuming I live to 85, how are we going to make this work? And so it's really, and I mean, like, compared to a lot of people, that's a much more enviable position. I acknowledge that, but, still, it's still a disappointment. And also then, okay, so there's that. So I kind of had to get over that fact and just accept that. And that's fine. I'm not going to starve, obviously. But I think that just over time, it's just been like, oh my God, I mean, if there's anything sort of positive about this, and there have been a few positive things, but one of it like, because I've struggled over the years, just sort of feeling like, is this really what I want? Every year I'm like, I don't know, do I want to keep doing this? And I mean, this pandemic has made it really clear that this is what I should be doing and what I actually love doing. Being off the road is really hard in a lot of ways. Yeah.
I know you've been thinking about doing a solo record and stuff. So being at home alone, not having the touring, is that going to accelerate that kind of thing? Has it helped with that at all?
You'd think.
You've been threatening to put out this solo record for years. Years.
My solo album is 20 years old.
It was that good that you've been coasting on it for 20 years.
I just want to make sure people have the capacity to take in more brilliance. It's like,
right. Yeah, you got to let us take a breather.
Bring everything that first album. I was supposed to release one like 9 years ago. Oh my God, I can't believe it's been that long. So silly. I don't know. I find it, like I have kids. That's one big thing, having especially twins, I think.
Twin boys who have a lot of energy.
Well, I've been saying to I said to people like, I feel like, why can't I get this done? Like I should be able to get this album out. They're like, it could be those like 3-year-olds that, you're kind of parenting. That's a job. So like, but I don't know. It's so hard to find. I find that creativity is like just getting space and getting into a groove is impossible. Kids, like, it's just, I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible for everybody. It just, some people can really make it work and I admire them. But I find it hard to just create space and like, physical space, emotional space, like all that stuff. And so I've just found it challenging. I mean, I have written songs, but they've mostly been for the band. And so I really do want to get to it. It's just, I've been frustrated, and I feel like a lot of artists are saying this, that, you think you have this time, why aren't you like being productive and practicing and writing? And again, some musicians have, but I just haven't. I feel like I'm getting to it now though. Like I picked up my guitar again after a long time. And also because I guess I could do solo live streams, which I didn't do a live stream at the beginning of the pandemic. I was posting
You're doing
videos,
a lot of covers and stuff, right?
Yeah, which is fun. I mean, I think it's a good exercise, and I just kind of wanted to put stuff out for people, and then I stopped because I was just like, I just don't. What I feel like is that I've always written, like, one of the things I did when I was 20 something was to write a mission statement. And I've actually done a workshop on this, which is pretty cool, that writing a mission statement that was very short. And it was essentially, no matter what I do in my life, I want to create bridges between myself and others and sort of make people feel less alone and, comfort people. So it just happened to be that music was a perfect way to do that. And I couldn't seem to get another job either. So that's what I'm doing. But I feel like the pandemic and everything that's happened with Black Lives Matter and the frightening, fascist government in the States and the sort of the out and out display of white supremacy and all, it just, I feel disillusioned. And so when you've spent your life writing songs for the, partially for the purpose of kind of trying to make other people feel better, it's hard to do that when you're like, what the, like, not everything I thought about the world, but because I certainly wasn't like very, like totally Pollyanna-ish, but I sort of had more faith in the world than I feel like I should have. Now with everything that's happened, I think I'll get back to a place where I can make sense of it. But yeah, I think maybe if you write, whatever kind of music, like to dance music or whatever, then that doesn't kind of shake you to your creative core. Like you can still make dance music, not to diminish the, whatever goes into making dance music, but you know what I mean? So it was like, how can I write what I normally write if I don't even feel like I can write that right now? So that's been the problem, I think, for me. And I'm also really lazy.
You've always been very passionate and outspoken about causes that you care about. And it seemed like you kind of stirred things up a little bit with the Wailin Jenny's last year. I think you referred to it as your Dixie Chicks moment during
Yes.
Black Lives Matter, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we don't typically post a ton on so I sometimes feel like we're the laziest band in the world. Like we're not very good at promoting ourselves. I said to our US agent and to Ruth in an email, I'm like, we should really be getting photos taken because we can never seem to get it together, like to do any promotional stuff. Anyway, so we thought, okay, it's important that we declare our allegiance to the Black Lives Matter movement as it stands for all people of color. And so we just, I found this great shot of two people standing above, like on a car or something in a protest with holding a sign saying, "I can't breathe." And then we put it up and said, we want to show our allegiance to this cause and hope that, I can't remember exactly what I said, but hope to rectify together some of this, great inequalities that exist. And it just blew the hell up. I couldn't believe it. It's like, how is it that, well, everybody saw what happened, right? It's like, how can you argue against this period? But, I mean, obviously a lot of people don't see it. And there was the all lives matter kind of thing. And right away, it was the first comment that came up after we put that up. I say, yeah, it was we. I mean, it's not just me. After we put that up was someone saying, maybe you should send a shout out to the businesses that all got, torn during the, and immediately it goes to looting, which to me always, the first place people want to go, because then they don't have to think about it further. And I mean, I think that other people would have left it alone and just kind of let people do their thing, right? Like just post what you think, leave it alone. But that's not me. And so I started commenting on other people's comments as myself. Like I wasn't for the Jennies. So I was just like, just arguing a whole bunch of people. And fortunately, we have enough fans that are, are compassionate and empathetic people that they, helped. They helped. And then I was like, can anyone else come in here and help me out here? But it was astounding to me. Like I also wanted to be really careful just about how I said things, and I didn't want to just like pounce, but some of the comments were just so offensive I couldn't even stand it. Like it was just, and then it turned into because people were making that distinction, like I hate it when bands are political and blah blah blah, and the whole sort of shut up and sing mentality, and like the men saying, girls, you really should keep your politics off, and like my fist clenched at that point.
It sounds like maybe it was for the best that you weren't on tour at the time, and maybe there was some quiet time for all this ridiculousness to blow over.
Oh, it was just, oh yeah. I was gonna say that like it quickly, okay, so people were saying, don't be political. Like I wish my favorite bands wouldn't be political because now I can't listen to the music anymore. And I was like, it's not political. It's saying that every human being should be treated equally. That's not a political thing. That's a human rights issue. Like, don't turn this into that. But then it quickly turned into, like, regardless of what I said, into this political thing, Democrats versus Republicans, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually I was just like, dude, to this one guy, like, he's like, you just lost. Oh, because I said something like, someone said something about Trump, and I said, I honestly cannot understand why people would ever support such a repugnant human being.
Yeah, yeah.
And some, older white guy said, well, you just lost a big part of your fan base. And the thing is, like, he's not wrong. But then I doubled down on it. I was like, I didn't sort of shy away from it. But so that was a sort of, I think that was the kind of the real Dicks and Chicks moment, was that one.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that you can stand up for other people and acknowledge that certain groups of people have been mistreated throughout history, which is undeniable, and somehow that's a bold or, crazy statement to some people.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I saw a great quote about just that, like, there are a lot of sort of disenfranchised white people who feel like, I have nothing, I've had a hard life, and if you can still put me above, a person of color, then I'm going to vote for you. Like, if they, it was just, and it makes sense. It's really horrible, but whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of people in some serious denial.
So on the music front, when things open back up, are you just going to go back to whatever the plan was before, or is there a kind of a new plan?
Well, we're going to go back to what we were doing before. We built up some really, really reliable followings, mostly actually, well, no, not mostly, a lot on the coast. So we do the Midwest and stuff like that as well. I think that's going to continue. California's always been a big one for us. We had a 10-day tour booked there. And I think had the pandemic not happened, we wouldn't have been able to go on that anyway because of the wildfires. So there are things that we have to consider as well, going forward. Just like we were in, I don't know if you remember when Paradise, California burned to the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were there a month before that happened. And it's crazy because we played there a few times and, I was just thinking that it's gone. I just can't even believe that. So, there were things like that to consider. But I mean, other than that, and it's hard to say what the fallout of this, acquittal for Trump is going to be, because a lot of people are talking about just how, broken the states is. And I don't know how, and emboldening for the white supremacists. It's like, is this going to be a dangerous situation? It's hard to say, but we're going ahead with the idea that we can continue to do what we were doing, so.
Are there plans for a new Jenny's album or anything? It's been a long time since you put out an album of original music. A long time.
It's been, oh my God, what, like 2000, when did Bright Morning or Stars came out? 2000. Yeah, it's been 10 years.
That's a long time between records.
I know. And I actually suggested to Ruth that we try and record something. We record something while we're waiting to get back on the road. And she kind of said it twice and she kind of ignores that I say it. Yeah. She's like, oh, good idea. Haha. And then I don't hear from her for like 2 weeks. I would love to. I think but it's also hard because we're all over the place, Heather's in California now. She moved to California. And Ruth's kind of all over the place, but she's on the West Coast right now. So I don't know. I don't know how realistic that is, but you're right. Like, it's pathetic. It's pathetic that we don't know about. It's pathetic that we're using 12-year-old photographs. And we're really pathetic.
One of these days.
Yeah, someday.
We'd love to see it. Yep. All right, well, let's talk about the other big topic on this show. I know that the Jennies have partnered at your shows a lot with mental health organizations. Can you tell me a bit about why that cause is so important for you?
Yeah, well, we decided a long time ago that we wanted to partner with an organization and sort of do fundraising on the road. And I believe actually it was, I said that, mental health stuff, I was a U.S. agent about it. And I said that, mental health stuff was important to us. And he suggested a National Alliance on Mental Illness. And it's sort of a grassroots national organization, mostly volunteer run. who really need the money. I mean, they're doing some amazing things. So we decided to work with them. So we've been working with them since 2014, and they're pretty much at every show of ours now. And so, you know, I mean, it's our audience that we, you know, they are the people who are contributing the money. We have a draw for Jenny's merch. People sort of donate, and it's been fantastic. And I think the reason we all picked that was because we all have, all of our families, and frankly, I think every family on earth has been mental illness, and I am someone who deals with that as well. So it's really important to me to just neutralize this, you know, this the stigma and just make it, and just normalize it, just talk about it and not be afraid to talk about it. And that's like, because I always do, I always talk a bit before we do the draw at each show, and I say that, you know, that my one line that I feel like always gets to people, I sort of hear it in the audience, like this kind of like, oh, you know, is to say that the brain is an organ like any other organ in the body, and it's susceptible to, you know, difficult environments and trauma and wiring, and you know, it's no different. And so why is the name attached to that, you know? And yeah, so it's a really important thing to keep talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, there's two issues here, and that is that I think everybody needs to be a little more aware of their own mental health, and so it's important that we all understand how that can impact us. But the other side is the more serious side, and that is the mental illness, which I think we need to be a lot more understanding of and a lot more open about. When I was a kid, I had no idea what a mental illness was. I had no idea that's why, you know, certain family members behaved the way they did, or things, or why I felt the way I did. I had no idea. So I think it's important for us to talk about it for both those reasons.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sort of encouraged by the fact that, you know, I'm seeing now with the boys in middle school and finding out what they're teaching in their health classes, you know, other than education, which is also extremely important, is talking about mental health. And yeah, it's so vital. So it's nice to see that happening, because when I was growing up, that wasn't discussed. And even though it was like rampant in our families, in both my parents, in our families, and yeah, there's just this either ignoring it or judging it, or, you know, so I mean, it is being talked about more, but it's still, there's a long way to go, you know. And it's interesting because I've been diagnosed as having bipolar 2, which is very prevalent among artists, and some would say partially why some people succeed at you know, with it, because I mean, most people are sort of, they think about bipolar disorder and they think of like Kanye West or just these real extremes, right? Or like Carrie Fisher, you know, was just like talking about, you know, swinging off chandeliers or in the depths of despair. So bipolar 2 is not as extreme.
And that's why it's hard to recognize, right?
Yes, it's misdiagnosed often. It's very hard to get that diagnosis. And the really horrible thing about it is that if people don't spot it, and particularly this is going to be the case with GPs, you know, with people going to their family doctors, but I also see it in psychiatry, where it's like there isn't they don't spot it. And if a person with bipolar disorder, bipolar 2 or bipolar 1, if they're given antidepressants, that makes it worse. So, you know, people are suffering, and that's, so I mean, it's I make that distinction, and yeah, so like for someone bipolar 2, there's a kind of a mania that feels like a really, idealistic, sort of, no, I wouldn't say quite grandiose, but this idea that like it gives you, I think a lot of artists don't have a lot of self-confidence a lot of time, but it gives you that confidence. So it makes you think that you can do things you maybe couldn't otherwise, right? And so, but then the depression's a lot worse. It's one of the bipolar 2 is the worst level of depression, I think. It's yeah. So it's but they call it the Cadillac of mental illnesses because it is associated with artistic, that's a component of it, but it's difficult to maintain and balance with that. Yeah.
If you're comfortable, I'd love to know more about sort of what was happening with you and what led up to you being diagnosed.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I was in therapy, and I mean, I've suffered with this stuff since I was 16, right? And so over the years, there's been kind of like checking in, because of just being in a really terrible place. And so it was, I think I knew that I had problems with depression, but I hadn't yet identified what was going on when I wasn't depressed. And there was never a normal, like there's no normal for me. It's sort of either, I mean, well, no, I would say medication giving me a bit more of a normal, but I'd still trend towards either really energetic and, full of ideas and kind of almost this sort of manic feeling, which doesn't always feel good, but can be really good. And then depressed, right? And like lethargic, can't, feel like I'm made of concrete kind of thing. So even with medication, it is still a maintenance and a challenge, but I'm way better than I was. So I had gone into therapy, and I think I just couldn't, had been at it for a while, working really hard. And my therapist was like, it shouldn't be this hard. Like, I think that, and she's like, I'm usually in the business of getting people off medication, but I'm thinking you should go and see a psychiatrist. So she recommended a psychiatrist that was working in the same building, and it just was not a good fit. And I went through hell with that. It was like 3 years of trying every medication combination, because psych meds are notorious for being so difficult to combine with other medications, there are so many side effects, all that kind of things. It actually feels to me like an absolute miracle that it ended up working out. And it was horrible. It was just, and I'm very comfortable on stage normally. And I went through a time where I thought I was going to die having to go out on stage. Like I'd be standing on stage and I would just be like hyperventilating, and I'd get out on stage and I could barely play my guitar because I was so nervous. And it was horrible. Like I was feeling like I would have to quit. Like I couldn't see myself being able to do that. And then thankfully something, I had a different psychiatrist who got me on the right track. It took a long time to still get everything else out of my system. And then eventually it just kind of clicked. It was really interesting. And I came from like a long history of doing everything in my power short of medication to try and, deal with this. So I'm certainly not you have to be on medication, but I'm also don't judge medication negative. Don't judge people who take medication, because some people absolutely require it. And bipolar disorder is one of those things that you typically cannot not be on medication.
So for people who still don't understand the condition, how is that different than just being moody or, going through a stressful time where you don't love your job? How is this different than what most people go through?
Well, it's funny because I put this often, like, I don't even know what's normal for people. Like, I've only ever been in my brain, and I keep wanting to people who don't suffer with this, like, what does your day look like? Because I know that I wake up, again, even with medication that is putting me in a much better place than I ever was, I wake up being like feeling stressed, like feeling like, and it's just a constant, my brain is just, I'm constantly trying to manage what my brain is doing. It's just exhausting. It's just moment by moment trying to harness what's going on in my head and constantly trying to find tools. I mean, meditation is good for anybody, but it's like, I guess my therapist said it's like, most people can handle like changes in their sleeping and, and can drink, I mean, like reasonably, but I mean, it's just, there's certain things I have to do to be healthy, and they're pretty stringent. And I think I think maybe this is my guess again, because I don't know what it's like to not have this brain, but I would think that when people get down and frustrated and sad, they can identify it as sad and frustrated if they understand emotions, and they can go, okay, I'm sad and frustrated right now, but tomorrow will probably be better, right? And or they can identify, like, I'm sad because this happened, like this friend didn't get back to me or whatever. Like, they can identify it as a result of a particular situation, whereas mine has no situation that creates those feelings. It's just there. It's just like, yeah. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely,
like, it's just, yeah. And so I just feel like it's always a marathon to kind of keep things in check. And that's just, I don't know. I want to talk to more people about how they feel, like people that don't suffer from, because and another way I put it is that there's very rarely a sense of well-being. Like, there's just always a sense that something's wrong and something's going to go bad. And I don't have as much of a sense of doom as I used to have, but there's still that sense like I've got to stay on top of stuff or it's going to collapse, Or another way of putting it, and I mean, I'm being very honest here, but I sort of, as I get older, I'm like, I don't give a shit if someone is just like, what a crazy person. I just don't care. I'm more interested if this helps someone, great. If you think I'm a lunatic, fine. Like, I don't care. And it's just, if that is the result, if that's the response, then that's an ignorance.
Well, that's the important of having this conversation, though, is because it's way more common than we like to think. And we're not crazy people. There's literally something wrong. If there's something wrong with your body or whatever, you understand that there's something that doesn't work right. And you either go and get the medication or get the whatever it is that helps you to function more normally if your leg is, doesn't work like it should or whatever. And it's the same thing with you and me and our brains. We recognize that the things that should help us, I don't know, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for me, the things that should help me, the exercise, the eating right, the sleeping enough and whatever, those things weren't doing the trick for me. They weren't fixing the problem. There was something broken in my brain that doing all those things right wasn't able to overcome until I had medication and therapy and all these kind of understandings. So I recognize that there's something in my brain that works differently than most people.
Yeah, exactly. And there's just no, why is there shame there? It's just, I mean, it's a history of how we did mental health, obviously, but it's just, this needs to stop because people are literally dying because of this, So that's where I say, and so what I was going to say was that I feel like, in this way back when I said that people, I think people can, when they're down, people that don't suffer from a mental illness, when they're down, they can identify what it is. It doesn't mean that that's less serious. Everybody has their own feeling about things. If you're sad, you're sad, right? And so, but they may be able to say, like, that's because of this and tomorrow will be different. But me, if something goes wrong, I feel so exhausted by everything. I'm like, life is not worth it. That's what it feels like. Anytime things are hard, it's like, it's just not worth it. I just struggle so much. And so I don't think that's a normal response, have that. I mean, again, I can only guess at what other people do, but, or how they feel. But anyway, so it's, I mean, I also don't want that to depress people. Like they've said, you know, for people to think, well, I have this problem, but even if I have, look, you know, I'm so lucky that I've been able to access therapy, and you know, that's not a lot of people can't do that. I've been lucky that I've had a psychiatrist that I see somewhat regularly, and that's not enough for a lot of people. I've had every benefit, and I still have to really work hard. And so I don't want that to seem daunting to someone who is also struggling, you know. I think, I mean, despite the fact that I have the difficulties and the struggles, it's still a good life in a lot of ways, you know. And still, and it's a whole range. Some people are medicated and it really works for them, and they have, you know, they just have a different circumstance and they're happy, you know. Like, I don't think everybody's happy all the time, but they feel good mostly, you know. But it's also just important to be real about it. And I think that, like, for people who are struggling a bit and thinking maybe I feel like I'm not working hard enough or whatever, I can't understand why I don't feel better, to hear someone say, you know, you are still going to have your struggles and it is going to be maintenance, but that's okay. You know, like, you can, it's this people thinking I'm going to reach this point and then everything will be fine. And that's not the case for anybody. It doesn't matter who you are and what what you're dealing with. There's never, life is about, you know, managing. So
a mental illness is just so isolating. You always feel like you're different than everybody else and nobody understands and it's never going to get better and all these things. And I just feel like if people know that there are other people going through the same things and that there is help available, I kind of hope that might make a difference for somebody who's in that position. And, or I hope that maybe somebody who hears one of these can recognize that maybe somebody in their family or a friend or whatever might be having some of these problems and might have a bit of a better understanding of what's going on and maybe a way to help.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, be able to see perhaps what's going on with their loved one. Absolutely. I mean, I think unfortunately, my cousin, who also suffered from bipolar disorder, she was bipolar 1 though, she took her life, you know, and she'd been fighting with it a long time. And I feel ashamed of myself, because back when she was really, you know, because she was taking medication that made her puff up and was like, she looked really different. And I was afraid of it because I was like, I didn't recognize her. It was really strange. And so I feel like I contributed to her isolation at the time, you know, and particularly because I've struggled with depression and, you know, all my life, I felt like, what the heck? Like, how was I not more empathetic? And so, but I think it's so ingrained. It's so ingrained in us. It's, you know, to be aware is so important. Like, just to be aware of the issue, but then to also be aware of your own bias, you know. I've really been, I'm super interested in how trauma affects us. I've been doing so much reading about it because my therapist is a trauma specialist. And I really think that, you know, I mean, there's so much we don't understand about mental illness. I mean, when you think about how much our society, our scientific community knows about the brain, it feels so rudimentary. And you know, scientists will say that themselves, like, it's, you know, the brain is such a mystery. But the kind of wiring that happens when you're young and you go through trauma, and I mean, a lot of kids go through trauma. There's so many different levels.
It's so common.
It's crazy. And so, yeah, so I mean, there, you know, disorders come out of that. If you're a person that has a genetic predisposal to having a mental illness, if you are relatively unscathed when you're younger, then you can avoid that bullet, you know. But if you go through trauma and you already have a ability to mental illness, then that's not great, So I'm just I'm constantly reading about trauma, and it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it just has such an impact on so many people's lives, and it's so hard to tell what it's going to do to you down the road or where it's going to manifest. And it shows
Hmm.
up in so many different ways.
Absolutely. I feel like there's so much great work being done, but not enough translation to the public. You know what I mean? Like this information is not sort of readily available. And so I just look at, like, I feel like we have a very traumatized world, and people don't see it. I mean, the people that support Trump, I think, have their own traumas that, they come from their own backgrounds where shit happened, and but we all do. It's not just not to focus on that, but it's, yeah, I feel like if there was even a basic understanding of trauma, but with the public, you see it, the world would be a different place. And yeah, so it's so vital to me, and I'm sort of trying to think of how I want to work with that in the future, either artistically or activism wise, But yeah, it sounds like you've looked into that a fair bit, hey?
Well, I mean, I'm a teacher, right? And it's you see it all the time. And whereas, when we were young, the kid who acted out, or the kid who was falling asleep in class, or the kid who was, just a pain in the neck, that was all that it was. And now I kind of understand that some of these kids have gone through hell in their past and in their young lives. And so of course they're going to act out somehow. Of course
Yeah,
it's going to affect how they behave. And of course it's going to affect how they succeed in school.
for sure. And I'm sure there are a lot of, more and more teachers who recognize that, but at the same time, like, there are still a lot who don't. And that makes me so happy to hear you say that. And not like I would have thought any different of you. But yeah, the kids that are the troublemakers are the ones that need the most empathy and guidance. Like, doesn't it seem insane to think that, well, I mean, it's still happening. I shouldn't say this, but the kids that are creating trouble just then punished more, punished for trauma.
Yeah, they act out, so we send them home where the problem probably comes from.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then you think of, during the pandemic, thinking of these kids that have, like, where school is their only break from, shitstorms, like, to have to just be there all the time. It's just heartbreaking.
Some of my students never have food at home. They come to school to eat.
Really? Yeah.
So it's hard for them to be home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the best we can do is try to help them as much as we can. Just,
For sure. And it's sort of like, when I think about, I had a solid, practical, solid family where I never had to worry about food. I never had to worry about anything to do with, like, the basics of life. I still struggled with stuff, and I can't even imagine not having consistency and, and food and proper shelter. And, like, it just, yeah, it's, and yet there is so little understanding about how that impacts kids. I have such a huge desire to see that improve. And I'm just like, I'm not sure how that's going to manifest, because I think doing the work with, like, and we also do work with the Canadian Mental Health Association, like, that's valuable because it gets money in the right places, but you need to change people's minds as well.
Thanks for putting up with that lousy phone connection. It's totally my fault. I knew it was bad and I decided to just go with it, and I learned a lesson the hard way. Hopefully you made everything out okay, but if you have any questions or feedback, please get in touch with me at flywithyourshadow@gmail.com. You can find Wailin Jennings music and merchandise at thewailinjennings.com. Nicky has her own website at nickymehta.ca, and that's NICKYMEHTA.ca, where you can find out a lot more about her. She's also written a wonderful picture book called Away But Never Gone. I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find us on social media at Fly With Your Shadow and on our website, flywithyourshadow.com. I'd really appreciate it if you'd share this show with somebody else. We're working hard to try to get new listeners all the time, and your recommendation could really help build our audience. I also host a music show called Tell the Band to Go Home, where I play a lot of music like what you heard today. You can find out more at tellthebandtogohome.com and on various podcast providers. I thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I really hope you'll join me again next week on Fly With Your Shadow.